To go further in depth on presidential politics and some other things, we're joined by a man who has run for president before, and prior to that served as governor of Arkansas, Mike Huckabee. Mike is the author of the new book, Gun, Gods, Grits and Gravy. Mike, it's great to have you back on America's Forum. That is a great title.
Great to be with you.
Wow, a great title for a book, but is there a chapter in there, lose the primary to win the general election?
It's a little confusing, JD, because if you don't win the primary, you're not in the general election. It's like saying, I'm going to lose all of the preliminary rounds, but I'm going to the Super Bowl. Well, it doesn't quite work like that, and you got to win the primary. Jeb is a good friend of mine. I think he's a great guy, and I'm not sure exactly what he was saying, other than that you don't want to maybe expend all of your political capital in the primary trying to go too far, pleasing some more of the most idealistic and ideological people in the party, that it makes it impossible for you to win the general. But you know what? I don't think that's necessary. I don't think you have to go out and sacrifice your convictions. What I think people look for more than they look for checking off all the boxes in some doctrinal statement, I think they're looking for authenticity. It's not that they expect you to agree with them on every issue. They at least expect you to agree with yourself. And after 8 years of watching President Obama say one thing and then doing something completely different and openly lying to us about Obamacare, Benghazi, now immigration law, I think people just want someone who will be straight and honest with them. They can handle the truth. What they can't handle is another series of one lie after another.
Well, we take a look at the current president, and I guess it might be called voters' remorse, because a lot of people are talking about Mitt Romney again. Of course, Mitt, the other day, had something to say on Univision. Our friend Rush Limbaugh calls it Romnesty, saying that the GOP Congress actually needs to get ahead of the president and pass an even more aggressive bill to allow illegals to stay in the country. What's your take on that whole situation?
Well, I don't think any American is going to be overly excited about what Congress does until what Congress first does is secure our border. Because everything we do before we do that is just an invitation for millions of people to get here as quick as they can, to get in on free education, free health care, all sorts of benefits that we can't afford to give out. People need to come here ready to contribute rather than coming here ready to receive. We're $18 trillion in debt. We welcome immigrants who want to come help build America, but we can't be the unloading dock for everybody who wants free services at the expense of taxpayers who are struggling to get their own kids educated, struggling to put groceries on their own table. The fact that most wages for workers in America have stagnated over the past 20 years. And as a result of that, I think the last thing we ought to be talking about is how do we make it possible for more people to come here on the government dole? We need to be talking about how do we make it possible for more hardworking Americans to succeed and get at least a rung or two up on the ladder of the American dream.
About a minute remains in this segment, Mike, and you've been here before, and we've visited the question before, and I know that you have your own television appearances that you make in your own name, but while you're here, with a minute left, what about 2016? When are you going to make a decision? Would you care to clue us in right now?
Well, the same answer that I've been saying, and that is that sometime in the spring is when I'll decide whether or not I'll make another go at it 16. Right now, I've got a lot of things that are my obligations that I need to fulfill. And so it's not something that I can decide upon until I'd say into late March, early April at the very earliest for me.
Okay, so we'll book you for April 2nd. Okay, rather than April Fool's Day. We don't want to fool around with this. Yeah. Speaking of commitments, Mike, you're very gracious to commit to stay with us for the next segment because there are other events in the news that we want to get your take on, including what has transpired in Ferguson. In the interim, you heard from Governor Huckabee. He's going to wait till the springtime. You want to see him run for president? Why don't you send me a tweet at Newsmax TV, #America's Forum, and we'll be right back. Let's continue our conversation with former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, who is Skyping in from Santa Rosa Beach, Florida. Mike, you have not been shy in offering some criticisms of what has gone on in Ferguson. Would you like to expand on some of those thoughts?
Well, first of all, I find it just incredibly dangerous that you have members of Congress on the floor of Congress holding up their hands in the hands up, don't shoot position, as if to say that somehow that is going to get you shot. I'm going to tell you something. What gets you shot is when you grab a police officer's gun and you lunge at him and you try to hit him in the face. And this nonsense of telling young people, don't hold up your hands because that's going to get you in trouble. And instead, I guess what they're teaching them is go loot a store, beat up a cop, reach for his gun, hope you get it before he does. This is not only foolish and dangerous, but it's really on the verge of anarchy. And I'm just disgusted that you have NFL players, politicians, and others who, no matter what the evidence reveals, no matter how many sworn testimonies show, that Darren Wilson, it's a tragedy that the young man got shot. But this is a young man who had just roughed up a store owner, just robbed a store, and now he's going after a cop's gun. And it's a horrible thing that he was killed, but he could have avoided that if he'd have behaved like something other than a thug.
Mike, the man identified in press accounts as his stepfather has now been charged with inciting violence. When you look at the situation that both the National Guard and the police were confronting in Ferguson Thanksgiving week, was there too much passivity on the part of the National Guard and the Ferguson police?
Well, let's be very clear. The National Guard can only follow the orders of the governor. The governor in this case was absolutely, probably, the most derelict governor I've ever seen in face of the kind of duty that he should have exercised. His use of the National Guard was disgusting and deplorable. There's no point in bringing the Guard in if you're not going to put them in front of the stores and keep people from running in and looting them. And Governor Jay Nixon, if he finishes out his term, will do it with disgrace because of the absolutely just disgusting manner in which he's handled this. In the case of the Ferguson police, they're in a tough spot. Have they handled everything beautifully? No. But no matter what they do, they're going to be criticized. And one of the things that I felt most just horrendous was when you had the President of the United States asking some of these thugs and rioters and mob members to come to the White House and sit down and have a conversation. JD, when people are breaking the law, they don't get an invitation to the White House. They ought to be getting an invitation to the big house. And this is not about race. This is about law and order. And I'm so grateful for African-American leaders like Charles Barkley and others who have said that Martin Luther King Jr. would be appalled at the kind of goings-on that have happened in Missouri because this violates everything that he gave his life for, which was non-violent protest. And if you think something is wrong, then go through the proper authorities, go through the proper law, and if you violate the law, then suffer willingly for having done so. And this is just an anathema to everything that the civil rights movement was truly all about and what it accomplished.
Mike, a minute and a half remains. Let me correct myself. The stepfather is being investigated now. He has not formally been charged. Mike, you mentioned audience at the White House for some of the protesters. And of course, Al Sharpton has emerged as, for lack of a better term, the White House representative in these situations. Al, of course, coming to prominence in New York City. And speaking of New York, now there are concerns about a grand jury decision there. With the minute that remains, are you concerned that Sharpton and others, regardless of the outcome of the grand jury, will view this as round two in racial protests?
Well, if there are cameras to be found, Al Sharpton will be there. And if we really want to stop some of this, just remove all the cameras and all the microphones and the notebooks. And I promise you, Al Sharpton will disappear as quickly as the morning fog under a 100-degree sun. He will disappear immediately because it's all about Al Sharpton. And even no matter what the grand jury came forth with, Al Sharpton continued to defy what was the sworn testimony and continued to tell a narrative that was proven to be untrue. He ought to be ashamed of himself, and the White House should distance themselves from him, not invite him over to give them advice.
More outspoken advice from Mike Huckabee, his new book, God, Guns, Grits, and Gravy. Governor, we thank you for your time, and America's Forum continues after this.